The right book doesn't just change your mind, it can change your life. And these 6 books did exactly that for me at different points in my life. And I'm going to share those with you today. Now, this first book is A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. A lot of us read this in high school, and that's when I first read it too. This is arguably Hemingway's best novel. And at the time that I read it, I had been reading some Hemingway already. I'd read some short stories of his, but this was the first full Hemingway novel that I had ever read. And it really floored me, and it really made me want to be a writer, and it made me want to go out and experience things in life and then write about them. And I think that's a really powerful effect for a book to have on a young person. In case you don't know, it's the story of an ambulance driver who's an American. He's working for the Italian army during World War I. He's wounded, falls in love with a nurse. They have a very romantic, very passionate relationship, and they try to escape the war. They literally try to run away from the war. It does not go well, and it's a very tragic story. I won't say any more about that. This book also really hit me with the prose style of Hemingway. This is probably peak Hemingway in terms of his prose style, which is famously terse and not very poetic, but at the same time, it's very powerful and very picturesque writing when it needs to be. And that's something that had a really lasting impression on me. And I've kind of always gravitated towards that style, that specific kind of prose style. So really powerful book. If you have not read this, highly, highly recommended. Probably the best Hemingway one could ever read. Okay. Now, this second book is The Heart is a Lonely Hunter by Carson McCullers. I read this when I was 18, and I had dropped out of college, and I distinctly remember buying this in a secondhand bookstore. It was a time in my life when I didn't know who I was or what I was trying to do, but I was trying to be somebody, trying to do something. And this book just really stood out to me. I distinctly remember reading the opening pages in the bookstore and being absolutely floored by it. Carson McCullers creates a world of just quiet devastation, of dreams that are just kind of falling apart, of unfulfilled promises, and this kind of really longing, unfulfilled desire. And not just physical desire or loving desire, but a desire for the characters to feel fulfilled, and yet society or their position in society and circumstances that are just far beyond their control doesn't allow them to be fulfilled. And yet society keeps telling them that they can control it and they can be fulfilled. And so I found it to be really profound. It's a very profound and a very American kind of story. And it's very relevant today. If you have not read this book, you absolutely really should give it a shot. So next one is weird and kind of a surprise. So not too long after reading The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, I stumbled across this book, Coin Locker Babies by Ryu Murakami. I didn't buy this specific edition at the time. This is a more recent edition, but I remember buying the edition that I bought. I remember buying it in the Hungry Mind bookstore in St. Paul, Minnesota. Again, around the same time, I was a soon-to-be failed musician. And this book just absolutely blew my mind. I read it at a time when I was really becoming much more aware of more postmodernist art, postmodernist movements in music, and kind of everything. My mind was just really kind of opening up and changing its views on everything related to art, everything related to creation, and things like that. This is an absolutely 100% transgressive book. It's one of the strangest books you could ever read. You know, it's probably up there with Burroughs in terms of just sometimes outright just bizarre stuff. Although I will say it has the narrative thread that Burroughs does not have. It's a story of transgression. It's a story of two brothers abandoned from birth. Their mothers put them in coin lockers in a bus station where they're discovered. They become wards of the state. And the book charts this really strange trajectories that their lives take. Their lives they live the most bizarre lives. They come across the strangest people in some of the darkest and weirdest and most bizarre parts of society. And it's a really just strange book. I would highly recommend it. If you have not read much transgressive fiction, I think you really should try this. It's just an amazingly weird and powerful book. Now, the next one, we're going to fast forward quite a few years to my first trip abroad, which was also my first trip to Vietnam. And this book is The Sorrow of War by Bao Ninh. And I remember buying this book from a newsstand in Hanoi. And it was a book that was supposed to be banned, but it seemed to be available everywhere. And that's a whole different story. But if you've ever been to Vietnam, you'll know what I'm talking about. Even when things are illegal, they're still available. So anyways, this book really blew my mind in a couple of different ways. First of all, it was my first exposure to this kind of autofiction / metafiction, in which the author is possibly the narrator is possibly the author, and possibly someone else as well. But it's a story of a young soldier during the American conflict in Vietnam, and it charts his kind of progress through the war. It starts at the end of the war when he's been tasked with collecting bodies, and he's kind of recollecting different things that happened to him and his platoon during their kind of the last phase of the war in South Vietnam. And then it kind of flips back and forth through time. It tells how he joined the army. It describes what Vietnamese culture was like, what Vietnamese society was like at the time. So it's a really interesting look into Vietnamese society that a lot of us don't really know about, of like what people were really thinking, what life was like, not only for the soldiers, but for the family of Vietnamese soldiers and for people living in society, the different kinds of conflicts they had. It's not a war novel, similar to A Farewell to Arms. It's not actually much of a war novel. It doesn't actually describe, big battles or fights or anything like that. It's more about the lead up to the war and the aftermath of the war, and of course, the sorrows and the real losses that people go through because of war. All right, now this next book I read when I finally went to college, and I was studying to become a writer, which I wasn't very good at. I was actually a better reader than a writer, but it's The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock. This book was just absolutely so powerful and so influential over what would become my reading. It was influential on my writing, but it became influential on my reading. And it opened me up to something I was unaware of, and that is something called rural noir or Appalachian noir or country noir, which is kind of an extension of neo-noir. And it's the story of a family who, in post-World War II, who are really troubled and really broken. The father was traumatized by what he witnessed during his time in the Pacific Theater during World War II. He witnessed some absolute carnage, some real brutal things, and he's just never able to process it. And he's convinced that life is always a constant battle with the devil. And he's probably not too far off, given the way the book is. There's a whole cast of strange, evil, maniacal characters that kind of move through the town that they live in and have various influences on the family. It was a really powerful book, and I really enjoyed it. One of the things I really enjoyed about it is that Pollock became a writer very late in his life. He didn't start writing until he was 40, which is a bit late to become a writer, an interesting choice in time in one's life to become a writer. The writing in here is really powerful. Again, spare, but not too lean and not too terse. It's definitely not hard-boiled. If you have any kind of passing interest in stories about families, stories about American life, and also if you're interested in knowing, what is rural noir, what is country noir, I would highly recommend this book. All right, and the final book, Going to Meet the Man by James Baldwin. Another book that I read in college when I was studying to become a writer. This is a collection of short stories, extremely powerful, very potent, very moving, and very touching short stories. It's probably got one of his most famous stories, which is Sonny's Blues. I did a whole video just on that story. I can link to that below, so I'm not going to go into it in huge depth. Baldwin's writing is really, really unique because he has such a unique perspective. He's obviously an African-American man growing up in post-World War II America, a time when everything is supposed to be great, everything is supposed to be so prosperous, but it's not for everyone. That's actually for a very limited group of people. And on top of that, he is gay. He's a gay man. So there's undercurrents of that come through the book. The book doesn't really he doesn't really outright discuss it in the book, but it's there, and you can see it in the undercurrents and in the themes that come out. This book really moved me because I had just never really read these kinds of stories before. Obviously, I have read African-American writers before, but there's something in Baldwin's writing of kind of like a damning anger in the stories of people, again, unfulfilled, people who, again, kind of cheated in life, sometimes not knowing it, which actually makes it even kind of makes you more angry when you read it. There's something about Baldwin, he's just really able to really stir up a lot of emotions. I remember the first time I read this, the emotions I felt were anger. I was angry at society. When I've read it again and again, I see other things in it. I see that, again, like I said, that kind of unfulfillment, that isolation that runs through it, and really a lot of tragedy also, and a kind of inevitable tragedy that happens. So really, really powerful writing. So these books shaped who I am, how I think, how I read, the different things that I look for in books, and the different types of writing that I like, sometimes on a sentence level, sometimes on a much larger thematic, on a meta level. But these are the books that really have influenced me and made me the reader that I am today. I'd love to hear which books have had these kinds of impacts on you. So please leave some suggestions, leave some comments below. If you've read any of these books also, and you've had similar experiences with it, I would love to hear about that in the comments below.